see something for you and your family. Make a puppet from things you've got. Scissors and glue, now write the plot. Watch, make, share.
Today on People Behind the Puppets, I'm talking to Jimmy Grimes. Now, Jimmy's made puppets on one of our productions and directed Red Riding Hood and the Wolf. Let's see what he's got to say. Hi, Jimmy. I'm Angel.
Hi, Angel. How you doing?
I'm really good, thank you. Thanks for coming.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So, Jimmy, tell me, how did you first get into designing puppets?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, when I was about 12, I watched, I think it was one of the first Wallace and Gromit films. And that's animation. And they use stop frame or stop motion animation. And they use clay or plasticine puppets a lot of the time. So at that age, I started playing with plasticine and making my own little people. But I didn't really get into making puppets properly until a lot later on. Probably about another 15 or so years later. Really, before I started really making more complicated puppets.
Okay. And you run your own company as well?
Yeah, so this is something that happened after quite a few years of working with lots of different people. I met a director called Andy Brunskill, and we found that we really enjoyed working with each other and had a lot of fun doing things. And we found stories that we really liked to make into plays with puppets. And so we started doing projects together. And from there on, we couldn't really stop working with each other. So we created a company called Brunskill and Grimes so we can carry on making work together.
And are all those puppets that you make for theatre?
Not all the time. Sometimes we make puppets for television and film or even music videos. So quite recently, I made some puppets for a music video for Coldplay, the band. And I was really excited because I got to go down to Bristol and work with Aardman Animations. And they're the people who actually made Wallace and Gromit. So they were like my first love with animation and puppets. So it was really exciting for me.
Yeah, that's really exciting. But why puppets? What is it you most enjoy about puppets?
Oh, that's a really tricky question. I guess I really like stories that can be told maybe more with visuals and images rather than always about the words and the script and people talking. I like listening to people talking, but sometimes I like just looking at really cool pictures. Like I really like picture books where there's not quite so many words sometimes.
I like picture books too.
And then so I guess theatre with puppetry, sometimes we can create really exciting pictures that move and come to life through the puppets without having it to all be about words and talking.
Yeah, of course. Now, when you're making a puppet, what are 3 things you really have to consider?
Oh, right. Okay, so well, I really like making animal puppets because there's so many different sorts of animals and it means there's so many different sorts of challenges for me. So one of the really important things I have to do when I start a project is to watch lots of videos of animals or go and visit some of those animals if I can. And then a really important thing to understand is how they move and the different ways they move. So for example, what's the difference between the way a sheep moves and how do you compare that to how a horse moves or a dog or a cat, and the different ways they move their legs or the different ways they behave when they're happy or not so happy, when they're excited. We all know that a dog wags its tail.
Oh, yeah.
But what does a sheep do? I don't know. Me neither.
We have to find out.
So they're the questions that I like to ask. And so I look at lots of videos. Sometimes I go and visit the animals if I can. And then I do a lot of drawing to try to understand that a bit better. And what that drawing normally comes round to is the anatomy. So that means the bones and the muscles inside those animals, because how their bones and muscles all work is going to have a really big impact on the way they move. And then I've got to take those ideas and try and make a puppet that somehow takes some of the most important bits from that anatomy and puts it into a character that we're making for the stage.
Wow, it sounds like there's so much to think about.
Yeah, but it's really exciting because every single puppet's a different challenge. So it never gets boring. And also sometimes we make them out of all sorts of different materials. One day it might be making it out of wood. Another time it might be cardboard. Sometimes it's plastic. Sometimes we can sculpt things on the computer and get them 3D printed. Whoa. Some people use paper mache, fabric. So every single puppet can be a different animal, a different story, but also so many different materials as well.
And what's your favourite type of puppet?
Oh, favourite type of puppet? Well, I really like it when the puppeteers can get really close to the puppet and put their hands right on it. because sometimes if you've got a puppet and it's on stage and you want to move it really fast or make it jump really sharp, like for example, if a cat were to pounce, then it's a lot easier for the puppeteers to do that if they're much closer to the puppet. And so I get really excited when I can make puppets that can move in really unpredictable ways, just like the animals that we're creating.
And you worked on a show called Warhorse. Can you tell us a bit about that?
I did. I worked on Warhorse, and that was one of the most important parts, really, I think, of me learning about puppets, because there's all sorts of different puppets, and I love all sorts of puppets. But what I really loved about working on Warhorse was what I was just talking about, was that they designed, Handspring Puppet Company designed those puppets. And they really, really considered the anatomy of horses and how horses move. And they also really considered how horses behave and their feelings and their thoughts that go on inside that animal that we don't necessarily know for sure, but we can see little things in their behaviour that maybe tell us how they feel. And so I was working on that show for about 3 years, and I watched it again and again and again while I was working on it. And it really taught me an awful lot about puppetry.
Oh, wow. And you've brought an animal puppet with you today.
I have.
Can we see?
Yeah, well, it's not quite finished. I've got one more piece to add. And this puppet, I wanted to try and make something that wasn't necessarily exactly what I make every single day, because that can take a long, long time. Sometimes making puppets can take weeks and weeks and weeks, and even longer at times. But what I really wanted to show was how a mechanism works. So hopefully this little puppet will do that. I'm going to just put one more little piece together. Now you'll probably recognise, anyone who's looking at this puppet here will recognise what it's made of pretty quickly. I'm sure you can probably guess just by having a look at it.
Looks like cardboard, I think.
That is exactly what it is. It's just cardboard, and I was drawing and printing out different sorts of shapes, and then I stuck them on some cardboard. And then what about these things? Have you seen these before?
Some kind of pin?
Yeah, it's a split pin. So that's a split pin, and they're really good because we can really easily make bits of puppet that are like joints that move around. And so we're going to just use some split pins and cardboard to see if we can make this little donkey that I've started making move in an interesting way. So here we go. So we've got a few different parts of this puppet. We've got the legs on the back of the puppet, and they're all stuck together. We've got the legs on the front of the puppet, on its chest here, but then there's a really interesting bit up here, and we've got these bits sticking up in the neck, and they attach to the head. And do you know what this is called, this mechanism? Shall I tell you?
I don't think
it's
I
called
do.
a 4-bar linkage.
A 4-bar
That's a bit of a long,
linkage.
yeah, 4-bar linkage is quite a long name. But basically, all it means is that when you move one part of the puppet, it's going to move another part of the puppet in a different way. Yeah.
Like it's all joined together.
Yeah. So it's a bit like, sometimes it's a bit like windscreen wipers. It moves a bit like this. It's like having a square or rectangle and pushing it and making it into a diamond. And that little mechanism idea can make all sorts of different interesting movements. So with this puppet, let me just see if I can make it do what I want it to do. Can you see how that head is stretching out? So if we wanted to make this donkey run a little bit, we can make it look like it's maybe stretching out to run or go into a gallop or something like that. So just by moving the body back and forth, we can make this head stretch forwards. And that's because there's some clever little bits going on back here, but not so clever that anyone couldn't make it. This is really, really easy to make. And to be honest, look at all these marks and all these bits I've cut. This was me trying to have a go at making this donkey. But now I've worked it out, I'm sure people at home could make a way, way, way more beautiful looking puppet than this one.
Yeah, why not give it a go? We've actually got the instructions on our website, so you can make a donkey puppet just like Jimmy's.
And if they didn't want to make a donkey, well, I think we could pretty easily change this. We could maybe turn this head into the head of a dragon or a unicorn.
Yeah.
And maybe we could put claws instead of hoof on the bottom of these legs. And you could probably change all sorts of shapes or put scales up its back and a long tail. Pretty much anything you want to make, but we could still get this clever little mechanism working to make its head move. And if you understand that, once you understand how that works, who knows what other sorts of mechanisms you could make.
Who knows indeed. Jimmy, that was brilliant. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks, everyone. Bye.